ever wondered what would happen if Isagi was trained by Blue Lock's top strikers? How strong would he become? Would he still join the Blue Lock project? And most importantly, would Isagi still become the #1 striker? Well, let's find out. Starting off with our first Blue Lock master, Marc Snuffy. Now, for starters, much like we did in our previous video, we'll assume this would all begin before Isagi ever joined Blue Lock, more specifically during his high school game. Just like in the original timeline, his team would lose the match the moment Isagi passed the ball instead of taking the shot. But here's where our story would change. You see, this time, Snuffy would happen to be randomly watching this game while visiting Japan. And it was after all this that he would catch Isagi breaking down, crying and screaming over such a meaningless loss. Now, thanks to that, Snuffy would get blown away by Isagi's passion for football and his obsession for winning. So, being the empathetic player that he is, much like how he did with Lorenzo, Snuffy would give Isagi a hand and bring him under his wing. Just like that, Isagi would accept the offer, so joining the Uber's Academy and never step foot inside Blue Lock. Now this is where the fun would begin, because just like I said before, Isagi was not the only talented player being picked up by Snuffy. In fact, waiting for him in the academy was none other than the new Gen 11 player Don Lorenzo. And this would now become Isagi's main rivalry during his time in the Uber's Academy. But as expected, at this point, Isagi was nowhere near Lorenzo's level. And despite trying over and over again, Lorenzo would just easily shut him down. So this is where Isagi's ego would start to grow, and where Snuffy would begin crafting his world-class striker. He would now take Isagi's football IQ to a completely new level compared to his original version. Not only would Isagi learn from his tactical brilliance, but he would also start using Snuffy's jujutsu movements, which would improve his physical traits moving forward. All of that would now make Isagi a completely different striker, and thanks to that, he would now unlock his meta vision way before even joining the Neo Eagles League. However, despite all that, Lorenzo would still not be an easy rival. But after mastering all of these abilities, Isagi would eventually surpass him, gain his respect, and so join Ubers for the Neo Eagles League. But are we sure Isagi would even be better off like this? Well, what if we could ask ourselves? Actually, with Polybuzz, that might just be possible now. With this app completely free, we can talk with all of our favorite characters all we want. So let's test it out and ask none other than Isagi what he thinks about my alternative scenario.
Not bad! Snuffy is a genius. Well, I guess a talented learner like myself. With him mentoring me, no one in Blue Lock would stand a chance. After all, I did beat them in my original version, so this one would make it look easy.
That sounds about right. But what if we wanted any other character? Maybe a character that hasn't been revealed yet in the show. Well, Snuffy might just be the perfect subject, and you can find him right away. Yup, just like the manga version. But if you think that's it, you have no idea. Because where this came from, there are millions of other characters you can talk to and be friends with anytime. From Blue Lock characters to Satoru Gojo, Luffy, and Goku, and of course, don't forget the ladies too. Polybuzz literally has it all. It's completely free, endless fun, and as an anime fan, you can even create your own character and share it with the world. So search code ANIMO07 in Polybuzz and unlock premium features completely free of charge. Use my link in the description down below to download Polybuzz and get to chatting. Only after you finish watching this video, because so far, we are just getting started. And this is where Isagi and Blue Lock would finally cross paths for the very first time. You see, without Isagi joining the program, Blue Lock would still thrive. Hero would now not get eliminated and take Isagi's spot, while Ren, without Isagi to rival him, would just dominate the entire project. But it would not be good for Blue Lock. Although they would still survive against Sai and Japan's U20 team, Blue Lock would still be at a much lower level than before, thanks to Isagi not being present to push all players to evolve. Thanks to this, Ubers would just dominate the entire league with ease. After all, Baru would join the team. Him and Isagi would create a rivalry and so start devouring each other left and right. And with Lorenzo's defense and Snuffy's tactics backing them up, they would just devour everyone in their way. This would not only help evolve Baru to surpass his original version, but with Isagi at a much higher level than before, he would completely crush Baru and the entire Blue Lock project. Now, as for the rankings, it's safe to say Isagi would end up with the highest bid in the entire league. And as for Blue Lock, everything would be completely different. You see, with a shocking surprise, Baru would now be the one ranked at #1. Rin would drop drop to number 2, with Nagi now surviving thanks to having no obsession with Isagi, which means it was now time for the U20 World Cup. And as expected, Ego would not let this chance get away, so calling out Isagi to join the team in order to evolve Blue Lock even further. Because of this, Japan would now be on a completely different level than before. Isagi was now a much stronger player overall, and even considered a new Gen 11 player thanks to Snuffy's training. As for Bato and Rin, thanks to wanting to devour Isagi, they too would also grow exponentially. With this, Japan would easily defeat Nigeria and England and have a very close match against France. And with Sai joining the tournament later on, Japan's level would increase even further, and it's safe to say they would now become the favorites to win it all. So this version of Isagi might just be the strongest one yet. But what if instead of learning from Snuffy, Isagi was raised by Lavinho? You see, let's assume the beginning would go pretty much the same way it went with Snuffy. Lavinho would meet Isagi during his last high school game and witness him passing the ball and lose the match. But here's where things change. Instead of feeling sorry for Isagi, Lavinho would see a player trapped in a style of football that doesn't suit his ego. So he would force Isagi to abandon that safe playing style and offer him a once-in-a-life chance to join FC Barça. And just like that, Isagi would now fly to Spain to learn from Lavinho. Now, this is where everything you know about Isagi would completely flip, because unlike Snuffy, Lavinho doesn't specialize in tactical or physical traits. In fact, he's the complete opposite. You see, he revolves his game on his creativity using his flashy dribbling traits and by playing completely free on the field. So instead of making Isagi a better version of his old self, Lavinho would set him free. He would fix one of his biggest weaknesses, his dribbling traits. Isagi would learn how to play around one-on-one situations and how to create his own plays without depending on a pass. But here's where it gets dangerous, because when you take Isagi's metavision and give him a dribbling trait on par with Bachira's, you turn him into an almost perfect striker. You see, he would read the field like always, but instead of passing the ball or waiting for a teammate, he would use that vision to carve out dribbling paths nobody else could see. Which means, for the first time ever, Isagi would need to depend on his teammates to score a goal. But I did say almost perfect, right? Because there was still one thing Lavinho couldn't fix, and that is Isagi's weak physical traits. Meaning, as scary as this version would be, he would still struggle against stronger and faster players. However, make no mistake, he would be leagues above the Isagi from the original story. Now, with nobody in the academy to test him, Isagi would climb the ranks pretty fast. But it was at this point that after hearing rumors about a talented striker in the academy, Bunny would get curious and decided to give Isagi a visit. And from the moment Bunny joined his team, everything would go downhill for Isagi. He would first toy with him, pretending not to be a big shot player and so give Isagi a chance. But it was right after Isagi's ego started to grow that Bunny would completely change. He would start to dominate him on the field, showing the huge gap between him and the top players and make Isagi realize just how far he really was from becoming the number one. But despite being furious at first, much like Sai, Isagi would awaken his ego even more, deciding to make his new goal to devour Bunny and become Barcha's number one. And thanks to chasing a monster like Bunny all this time, Isagi would grow at an insane rate, fully mastering his dribbling and rising up as Barcha's ace for the Neo Wiggus League. And this is where it all changes for FC Barcha. You see, in the original timeline, they were known as one of the weakest teams in the entire league. But now, with Isagi carrying them, they would become a genuine threat. They would destroy Manshine, defeat Ubers, and Bastard Mansion, all thanks to Isagi alone. But there was only so much Isagi could do against a super team, which means their run would eventually come to an end against Rin and PXG. Why? Well, that's simple. PXG had something other teams didn't. They would target Isagi's physical weakness and make it even harder for him to dominate on the field. So, despite still making it close, Rin, Shido, and Charles would end up being way too much for Isagi alone to handle. And so PXG would not be the ones to win the Neo Wiggus League. But don't get it twisted, Isagi would still be considered the best player in the entire league, finishing with the highest bid above players like Kaiser and Lorenzo. And as for the Blue Lock rankings, well, not much would change. Rin would take the number 1 spot, Shido would be number 2, with Nagi surviving once again and number 3, and Bato and Bachira closing out the top 5. Which means it would finally be time for the U20 World Cup. Now, with a complete number 1 striker like Isagi this time around, Japan would now shift from Isagi's tactical plays to thrive solely on chaos like he had learned from Lavinho. With that, they would blow past teams like Nigeria and England and give France far more trouble than before. But just like in the original story, that same chaos would come back to bite them, and so that match would only end up in a draw. Now, it was after that game that Sai would finally join the squad, finally team up with Isagi, and so create the greatest duo in the entire verse. You see, Sai would create every perfect play for Isagi to use his metavision and dribbling to the best of his ability. With that, they would go on to dominate everyone in front of them, finally get revenge, and devour Bunny, eliminating Spain from the tournament, and in the end, win the U20 World Cup. So we've seen Snuffy and now Lavinho, but what if we change things up a little? You see, what if instead Isagi was raised alongside Loki? For this next one, we'll have to use our imagination a little. After all, since Isagi and Loki are not only the same age, but Isagi was never from France to begin with, they would never have the chance to play together growing up. So let's imagine a scenario where Isagi's family was forced to move to France when he was a kid, and he ends up playing at the same club as Loki right before his move to PXG. And just like that, Isagi and Loki would now grow up together. Now, from the very first day, as expected, Isagi would get nowhere against Loki's Godspeed. You see, no matter how hard he trained, Isagi could never match that speed. So, after realizing chasing Loki through speed alone was useless, Isagi would change his strategy completely. Instead of trying to keep up, he would learn how to predict, reading the tiny tails in Loki's body the instant before he accelerated, and so anticipating Loki's movements before they even happened. Now, to pull that off, Isagi would have to improve his reaction speed, build up his physical traits to keep up with Loki on body-to-body plays, and just to survive against a genius on the field, he would accidentally force himself to awaken his metavision way earlier than he did in the original story. So this Isagi would become something terrifying, referred by his teammates as someone who can think not 1, but 3 steps ahead of everyone on the field. But don't get it twisted, Isagi would still be nowhere near Loki's level at this point in the story. After all, Loki would remain the genius, and that is exactly what would light Isagi's ego on fire. He would start to get obsessed, trying to find any possible way to beat a genius like Loki. And so, Isagi would figure out the difference between talented learners and geniuses way before he ever joined the league. Now, even though they would hate each other, as a duo, Isagi and Loki would completely dominate everyone in the lower levels of French football and so become known as one of the deadliest pairings in the U20 ranks. But much like Isagi and Kaiser, this was a rivalry built purely on devouring each other. And when Loki would get the title of New Gen 11 player, as well as being invited to join PXG as one of the masters for the Neo-Wigos League, Isagi would be fuming. So from there, both of them would join PXG, and ashamed at being seen as inferior, now stuck playing under Loki, Isagi's ego would start to burn even hotter. So his new goal would be simple: devour the entire league and prove to the top clubs that these so-called geniuses were nothing but lucky. And by teaming up with Rin, Shido, and Charles, this would be the perfect opportunity for Isagi, by finding his second rival, the Blue Lock genius Itoshi Rin. As expected, these two would go back and forth every single game, but this time, Rin would not be quite ready for Isagi. Because thanks to all those years hunting Loki's Godspeed, Isagi's IQ would now be on a much higher level coming in, and so we would now play the rest of the league like absolute puppets. Which means, with a super team like that, PXG would easily dominate the entire league, and in this version, be crowned champions once again. But here's the surprise: despite all that, Isagi would still come out behind Kaiser in the bidding rankings, and this would once again make Isagi feel humiliated. Now, as for the Blue Lock rankings, not much would change from our previous version, with Rin coming in first, Shido would be number 2, Nagi number 3, with Bado and Bachira following. Which means it would finally be time for the U20 World Cup. And after the Neo-Wigos League, this version of Japan would become a team depending on Isagi's and Rin's chemical reaction to win this tournament. As for the matches, they would take wins against Nigeria and England, with Isagi going up against Loki for revenge in the match against France. It was in this match that Isagi and Rin would finally create their first chemical reaction after realizing they had no way to beat this team. So they would go toe-to-toe with France, but much like in the original story, their hunger to devour everyone would come back to bite them, and Japan would still end up falling to France in the final minutes. But it was after this that everything started to change. Because after the groups, it was now time for Sai to join the squad. And it's safe to say, much like in the previous version, Japan would tear through everyone all the way to the final, where this time they would be the ones shocking friends. Isagi would finally get his revenge, beating Loki for the very first time, with them not knowing exactly what to expect from Sai's game, which means that leaves us with two masters left to explore. And let's start with the one that might just fix all of Isagi's biggest weaknesses, Menshine's master, Chris Prince. Now, for this one, let's keep it simple. Just like Snuffy and Lavinho, Prince would come across Isagi during their last high school game and bring him over to England to join Menshine City's academy teams. But here's what makes Chris Prince different from every other master. Unlike the rest, Prince wouldn't go after Isagi's biggest strength, but instead go straight after his biggest weakness. You see, as we know, his philosophy centers around building the ideal self and improving someone's physical traits to get the most out of their own weapon. This means, to add to Isagi's insane IQ and rebel ego, Prince would help him build that ideal athletic body, which just happens to be Isagi's biggest problem. So, under Prince, that problem would completely disappear. He would improve his speed, acceleration, strength, and stamina, and make Isagi elevate all of these traits to insane levels, so turning him into a completely different player than before. Now, pair all that with his meta vision, which he would unlock around the same time as the original story, and you get an Isagi with no weaknesses in his game. Which means, for the very first time, Isagi would no longer have to rely on anyone to score, and so would finally be considered a true #1 striker. So by the time he reaches the Neo-Igus League, there's really no way to stop him. Not even Rin, Lorenzo, or Kaiser could do anything about it. But trust me, it gets even worse for the rest of the league. You see, unlike the Barca version, Isagi would not be alone this time. Instead, he would be paired up with one of the best geniuses in the entire verse, in Nagi, as well as two other top players in Ryo and Chigiri. Menshan would now go from the worst team in the entire league to potentially having the best squad. So what would happen this time? Well, it's pretty simple. Thanks to Isagi joining this team, Nagi would no longer lose his motivation and would look to devour Isagi in every single match. Now that alone would completely transform this team and Nagi himself. Which means, not only would Isagi be better than before, but the whole Menshan squad would now evolve at insane levels, just trying to keep up with him. So, as expected, they would demolish everyone in their way, including PXG and Kaiser's Bastard Munchen, and so win the Neo-Igus League. As for the rankings, Isagi would get the highest bid in the entire league, while the Blue Lock rankings would all remain pretty much the same, besides Nagi that would no longer be eliminated and instead would climb up all the way to #2. Which means, by the time the U20 World Cup comes around, Nagi would now get called up and join the squad. And with a true #1 Isagi by their side, Japan would now have their best shot at beating France. You see, with Isagi as a true striker, Hugo wouldn't be able to play his mind games, and so France would have a much tougher time than before. Meaning, Japan would beat France, along with Nigeria and England, and sweep their entire group into bracket play. That's when Sai would join the squad for the knockouts, get revenge against Bunny and Spain, and after that, it's safe to assume Japan would be in a great position to win the entire thing. Which leads us to our final and strongest master in the verse, the #1 striker Noel Noa. Now, same as our previous video, Noah would take Isagi under his wing after watching him lose that high school game. And this is where Isagi would start to change completely. He would first land at the lower levels of the academy, so nowhere near players like Kaiser and Ness. And in the beginning, he would struggle massively, since at this point he was nothing but an average player with a good brain. But as expected, after facing such adversity, his true ego would slowly start to surface. As for Noah's training, well, this one is simple. He would shape Isagi into his ideal rival, pushing Isagi to improve his physical traits almost immediately, which would then allow him to develop Noah's greatest weapon, his ambidextrous ability. An ability that would allow Isagi to shoot perfectly with both feet, making it impossible for any defender to predict him. Not only would this already make him a far better player than in the original timeline, but Noah would also teach him how to read the game, which would then trigger Isagi to awaken his metavision way before he even joins the Neo-Igus League. Now, all this training training and evolution would take place as Isagi was climbing the ranks of the academy. This is until he reaches the top ranks, where he would finally meet Kaiser for the very first time, and so start their crazy rivalry once again. The difference this time is that instead of fighting for goals, they would now be fighting each other to become Bastard Munchen's future ace, who would eventually become Noel Noa's successor. Now, much like the original story, even though in the beginning this new Isagi would struggle to outshine Kaiser, it wouldn't take long for the genius of adaptability to catch up and finally reach Kaiser's level, which would then lead us to the Neo-Wiguus League. So with a much stronger Isagi at this point, and the rivalry already pushing them to higher levels, as expected, Bastard would have a much easier time against the entire league, all the way up until the game against PXG and Blue Lock's #1, Itoshi Rin. This is where Isagi and Rin would see each other for the very first time, and so also start their own rivalry once again. But despite Rin being a genius and Isagi a talented learner, they might have struggled with this matchup in the original timeline. In this version, Rin would struggle much more to keep up against Isagi or even Kaiser. After all, an Isagi with all of these new abilities paired up with Metavision that is also at a higher level than before would be more than enough for Bastard to come out on top and win the Neo-Wiguus League. Now, as for the rankings, Isagi would once again finish with the highest bid in the entire league, with Kaiser right behind him. And since he was never part of Blue Lock itself, with Bastard Munchen winning once again, despite being in a more dominant fashion, the Blue Lock rankings would all remain exactly the same, meaning it was now time for Japan to prepare for the U20 World Cup. In this version, same as the original timeline, Isagi would still get called up to join the team, while Nagi would once again be eliminated and join Side B. So what would be different this time? Well, that's easy, with Isagi now being not only a true #1 striker, but at the highest level he's ever been before at this point in the story. It's not crazy to say that he would be a new Gen 11 player and so make Japan a far more dangerous threat than before. So they would completely destroy their entire group, defeating Nigeria, England, and even France, with Isagi dominating the duo of Hugo and Loki. After that, they would now move on to the knockout stages, where once again Japan's best player, Itoshi Sai, would finally join the squad. And once that happens, there was no way Japan was going to lose. After all, a team with Isagi and Sai as new Gen 11 players, and Ren hungrier than ever to now keep up with both, it's safe to assume Japan would probably win it all. So that's all 5 masters and 5 completely different versions of Isagi. Now which one do you think it's the best? Let me know down below in the comments. Now, if you enjoyed this video, make sure to check out this one next, where I created an alternative scenario where the Blue Lock players were reborn with all their memories. Go on,